The theme is finding transcendence in today's world. And that's quite a task. Because the world we live in is rapidly changing. We're in a new millennia, and that signals by its own symbolism that we're moving away from 20th century, 19th century thinking, which itself was the result of an enormous momentum that changed in the 17th century. Because then we came out of the Middle Ages. We'd gone through a transition called the Renaissance. And that 17th century bequeathed to us certain characteristics which we're finding a little too narrow and incomplete today. I would like to cite 4 of them. In the 17th century, we had some marvelous architects. 3 British, 1 Frenchman, and a cast of others. The Frenchman, René Descartes, bequeathed to us the distinction between and the separation of mind or spirit from matter. He put one on one side and one on the other and forgot to put them back together. Thomas Hobbes, his opponent and friendly compatriot in England, said, "Whoa, wait a minute. Since you put the two apart, we don't need spirit anymore. Everything's matter. Everything's energy." And then along came a man called Francis Bacon, another British adventurer, who decided we no longer need to mythologize nature, which was another way of saying desacralize it. And so came out with a new term for his dream, which was called New Atlantis. He said we no longer need to contemplate nature, we need to dominate it. And we can thank him for our ecological mess we have today. And finally, the greatest genius of them all, who synthesized them, Isaac Newton, remarkable individual, pulled it all together and said that the most basic principles of nature, of the universe itself, was based upon mechanical principles and could be best understood through mathematics. And so we lost transcendence. We sort of threw it away and gave it to that other group called the church. And they had no ladder going to that church, and so they forgot about the eminence within. And we had to search for a God up there. And so we have come for 3 centuries now with that inheritance. And we've done pretty good. We've learned to understand nature from its energy point of view. Modern technology is the result, the product of it. The microphone, this building itself, electricity. These are the gifts that nature's given us, but we also had forgotten something. We were only coming to nature from one perspective. Seeing nature as something to dominate. And so if you take a walk in the woods and you happen to bring an employee from the AT&T company, he doesn't see trees, he sees potential telephone poles. And yet I said earlier, we're moving away from that today too. We're in an era, what is now called Post-Modernism. And in that postmodernism, we're coming up against certain conflicts, certain anxieties. We're discovering that we just moved out of the bloodiest century in the West in recorded history. There were more wars and decimation of people in the 20th century than ever before. And so that too came with modernity. And when you want to cite when did it really begin to change into post-modernity, I would suggest that the year it changed, at least as a major first step was 1969. And a few days ago, I was listening to Garrison Keillor as I was driving along. And as he sometimes does when he opens up his program, he will cite what occurred this very day that he's speaking in history. And he said, today, in 1969, on July 20th, we put a man on the moon. And when I heard that, I realized that's exactly what happened. We finally learned to conquer outer space. We knew for sure that the moon was not made of green cheese. And so that becomes a landmark, an irretrievable landmark that inspires us with the realization that more and more we can bring energy under our province. But interestingly, and I find this often very symbolic, that very same year that we conquered outer space, a gentleman from the Himalayas went to the Menninger Foundation and conquered inner space. Now we've got it, outer and inner. Swami Rama demonstrated beyond the paradigms, the dreams, the wishes of all the scientists, a demonstration of human ingenuity and potentiality that they could only dream about in reading their fairy tales. And so what we had within the space of 1 year, a sort of total picture now, to give us the confidence that we no longer have to be submissive to the superstitions regarding nature, nor do we necessarily have to reach out for something out there to fulfill our inner nature. We can do it ourselves from within. And so we're learning today, thanks to these two prominent episodes, that it's no longer necessarily mind dominating matter. It's mind working with matter. It's mind integrating matter. And we call that yoga. We're beginning to change our minds. We're beginning to suspect that maybe transcendence is a possibility. And what is transcendence all about, really? As a working definition, let's refer to it simply as the ability to fulfill my total nature. Mind, body, and spirit. Inner and outer. And one of the major things we can utilize here in achieving this is to remind ourselves of something William James said about 1904. The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. Such a simple pronouncement, and how profound. And that came about in an illustration that I love to talk about in 1989, in December, Christmas time. Daniel Troy, a Washington occupant, decided to take a vacation. He wanted to go to Czechoslovakia because in 1989, if you recall, the Soviet Union collapsed. That was the end of Russian communism. And so all the suppressed countries in the Balkan region and their adjoining neighbors were suddenly released to find a new way of life. What way of life? All they known as communism now for a few decades. And so he decided to go there and see what was going on. He arrived in the capital and he headed right for the Civic Forum building. And he walked in, and lo and behold, sitting in the center of the room was Rita Klimova. Now, Miss Klimova happened to be President Havel's secretary and translator. And he walked up to her and said, "Hello, my name is Daniel Troy. I just happen to be an American constitutional lawyer." "Really?" she said. She handed him a one-page document that summarized the revised Czech Constitution in English. And he said, "I have an idea. I will translate the entire Czech constitution with you, if you will help me. I don't know any Czech, but you don't know any constitutional law. What if we work together? And believe it or not, an American helped write the Constitution of Czechoslovakia. You see, Eastern nations were beginning to codify their democracies into constitutions. They were getting away from the party rule, which is totally arbitrary, almost anarchical. So now they wanted to move into the new postmodern age. That became so successful, an organization came out of New York City called Charter 77 Foundation. And more constitutional lawyers went to Europe to help these countries establish their new constitutions. In other words, in the midst of all the sorrow, all the deaths, all the tragedies, men and women were beginning to respond to the future, even though they weren't quite sure how it was going to turn out. So the attitude of changing my inner mind about the world enables me to change the outer aspects of their lives. Why? Because we learn in yoga that Prakriti, matter itself, takes its cue always. It is the servant of the mind. Intention leads the way. Noel Johnson in when he was in his 60s, had a very bad heart. He was overweight, stiff. He was given the cheerful news that he had 6 months to live. Figuring he had nothing to lose, he went for a walk. Next day he went for a longer walk. Following day he went for an even longer walk. And one day he began to run. And at the age of 84, he competed in the New York Marathon. And at the age of 88, he broke the world's record. And in 1996, at the age of 96, he said it's time to check out. So he got 30-some years extra life because he changed his attitude about what he could do with himself. The body has a wisdom that we rarely invest our time and attention in. And that's what yoga is all about. To lead us through the body, through the emotions, through the mind, until finally we get into the spirit. It is the path of transcendence. Transcendence is not out there. It's not on another planet. It's not a product. Transcendence is an awakening to who I am. And in that awakening, I have to give up something. I have to give up the sleep I've been in. And that sleep can be characterized, I think, in the following way. Because you see, if I continue to take in information as I always have, I will continue to think as I've always thought. And if I continue to think as I've always thought, I will always continue to believe as I've always believed. And if I continue to believe as I've always believed, I will continue to act as I've always acted. And if I continue to act as I've always acted, I will continue to get what I've always got. We have to risk transcendence. We have to be willing to risk the lead go of modernism. We have to embrace the future, and the future does not have a map yet. Why? Because the future is in you. You have to discover it. You have to produce it. You have to design it. And you have to take responsibility for it. And it has nothing to do with dominating nature. It's learning to live with nature. We have to recover the Gaia principle. We are united to everything in this universe in some mysterious way. And what happens to us happens to everything else in some mysterious way. And we have to stop thinking in terms of the enemy out there. We have to put aside the attitude of détente, all that tension we had with the Russians for so many years. all the tensions that are going on today between the Arabs and the Israelis, between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, just to cite two. We have to recognize that if you know your enemy, you may win most of the time. But if you know yourself, there is no enemy. That's from a Chinese sage in the 5th century BC. What we have to do is recover something that Martha Graham told us about many years ago. She said there's a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there's only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and will be lost. You are the medium of transcendence. And that's what we're doing. That's what history's all about. We're learning to transcend. We're learning to discover the creativity of human nature and nature at large. And if people are wondering if perchance they might already have a taste of that may be operating in their psyche, that may be motivating them in their actions, in their conduct, I want to give you 12 warning signs of transcendence. Be careful. First, there's a chronic attitude of positive expectations. There's a tendency to reframe events in a constructive way. 2, there's a persistent presence of friendship and a building of that network. 3, there's occasional peak experiences. 4, there's a sense of somehow that matter is not just energy, that perhaps it has a flicker of consciousness. 5, there's a tendency to adapt to changing conditions and not keep insisting this is the only way to do it. 6, there's a response and a rapid recovery from adrenaline system due to repeated challenges. Next, there's an appetite for physical activity. There's a willingness to extend my body to discover what its wisdom is all about. Next, there's also repeated episodes of gratitude and generosity and wonder about life itself. Very dangerous. Next, there's a compulsion to recognize I need to contribute to society. I can't keep taking. And last, there's a possibility of an undaunted sense of humor. Now, if 5 or more of these indicators are present in anybody here, you may be at risk for transcendence. We are complete, but we're unfinished. You've been given something called free will, the ability to choose. That's how you finish the task of who you are. You have an unrestricted desire to learn. It should never be smothered. School isn't over when you get a degree or a certificate. It's just beginning. It's interesting, in Aikido, when you're awarded the black belt, they now call you a beginner, because you've been preparing to get to be a beginner. And now it becomes a lifelong task. Also, you have an urgency, if you will, almost a compulsion to strive for union with life. You want the sense of interconnectedness with people, with your career, with your interests and your hobbies. You place a premium, hopefully, on wholeness with wholesomeness. You want to kind of have a strength and an ease in this world. You want to foster an embodied awareness so that you realize how to touch the lives of other people when it's appropriate. And in the meantime, you have to learn to resist the superstitions that are fostered because of what we call the failures of life. Gradually you understand at every level there are enormous brave people out there. They'll never make the news or CNN or be on any program. But those are the people who are struggling with their compulsions, with their addictions. Those are the mothers who are raising in a single life with their children. These are the people who have recognized, because they've worked so hard, they may not always have achieved what they had hoped. Because the greatest burden as we get older is not anger, it's sadness. Somehow we feel we've let ourselves down, or that life itself has let us down. And so that's the major superstition, that's the major demon we have to work with, because that's what smothers transcendence. And so you and I have a task. That's why we're here this weekend. We have a task because without our insights, without our willingness to live the kinds of life we have when we embrace yoga, the world won't reach what it's meant to reach. It may stall. We have to recognize that we too are ripening in life. We're not fixed at adulthood, we're evolving. We pass through seasons of growth, emotional and mental. Our story has many chapters yet to be discovered. This is the path of transcendence. Now, life will provide us with all the surprises and the unpredictableness. We don't have to worry about that. It's coming. What we have to do is learn how to respond. Show up, respond, and stay focused. You see, success is primarily a motivation from the unconscious to make effective use of all its many and varied learnings, now and yet to come. We need to develop a presence that inspires other people to blossom in life, to make them recognize that the universe is not their enemy, it's their ally. How will they know that if we're not kind, if we're not forgiving, with no hidden agendas, no handout? We have to recognize that we can only evolve through choices. We have to exercise buddhi, not manas, buddhi. We have to recognize that we create the outcomes we desire. And we have to be willing at times to step beyond our borders in order to enrich our lives more. So in the face of new experiences, are you defensive or curious? We have to recognize that many rules are there simply to limit us, to keep the energy somewhat contained. We may have to break those rules. Of course, Swami Rama never did that. We have to recognize that there's a difference between fact and meaning, and that sometimes a fact has multiple meanings. And depending upon my stage of awareness, I begin to understand how to interpret the fact. You and I are mysteries, fundamentally. And if our self-image is small and restricted, or cold and inert, then what we produce will most probably be stillborn, like its maker. So it's essential then to know what is vital and alive inside, and shape our lives in its image. You carry all the archetypes. What are all the gods and goddesses, the fairies, and all the spirits that are written up in the tales and the sagas and the epics? They're simply symbolic images of powers within us. Powers within us. So when we face something, instead of whining over the problem, ask, where's my power? How can I bring it up to face and cause a solution here? You are on this path of transcendence, like it or not. You can come struggling and fighting and resisting, but you're still on it. Some of you are going to take longer, but you're on it. So why not get with it? Huh? The simplest act of kindness opens up transcendence. When Master Lin the other night talked about opening up the hands this way, he said the channels open up. So you stroke the cheek of your child. You embrace your beloved. You extend the courtesy to someone passing through the doorway. You're on the way to transcendence. You're expanding who you are to embrace that being. You're learning to be sensitive. What does that mean? It means communication. One day I was with Swamiji one night, Swami Rama, and we were just watching TV and clowning around, and suddenly he reaches over and he tells Davy, call Mrs. Nelson up. Mrs. Nelson lived in Connecticut. This is out of the blue. So she dialed the number and handed it to Swamiji, and he got on the phone and said, don't worry, Mary. John's operation will be all right. I'm praying for him. Everything's fine. Say hello to the kids. Goodbye. John was in a very serious heart operation at that time. So Swamiji was peeking in. He was aware. He was sensitive. He had reached that level in his own transcendence that he could be in touch. And he shared his energy, his concern, so that they would feel a little safer. How does it begin? It begins with a simple act. Your courtesy towards each other here over the weekend. It hasn't gone unnoticed by many of the staff. This has to be fostered. This has to become a habit. This must become an attitude of mind. This is what William James was talking about. If I want to change the outer aspects of my life, I've got to change the inner attitude of my mind. Fundamentally, I have to learn to love myself profoundly, because I can only give in terms of how I view myself. If I think I'm a bad person, I'm ignorant, I'm stupid, I don't deserve it, how are you going to act towards others? Swami Rama said, your body is not just flesh and bone. It's not just organized matter. Your body is a temple. Boy, does that change things. And he said inside that temple is a temple dweller. Like it or not, you're sacred. And your body participates in that, in its temporary way. And if you walk out of here with that attitude, it changes. It changes an awful lot. Regardless whether you're an entrepreneur, an accountant, a hairdresser, whatever. And so we need to recover that sense of who we are so that we can provide a presence that touches the other people's lives. Everything you think and feel is giving off an energy. It gives off a signature. It is picked up by the unconscious of those around you. That's why when you walk into a house, you either feel at ease or uncomfortable. That's why you walk in a room with a group of strangers, you gravitate towards some people and you avert others. Huh? It's not reason. It's beyond reason. It's more powerful than reason that's happening in you. It's that unconscious power that's closer to the spirit, which embraces all and excludes none. And so, as we move through life, we have to learn to be a great deal more flexible. We have to recognize that not everything can last, but we still can celebrate it. Not everything is just pure relative, but you can celebrate relativity. Having a wonderful meal, having a conversation with a friend, it won't last forever, but what a wonderful opportunity to be enriched. If we want to find out where the eternal values are, we have to go within. And that's where you're headed. And one day we have to say, I've got to take this more seriously. Not solemnly, but just seriously. Not rigidly, but flexibly. Not with a great deal of determination, but with a spontaneity. And I think the words of Goethe, the great German poet, philosopher, and scientist, can give us an insight here. He remarked one day, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Oh, I'm not sure, I don't know what, maybe, what would happen? I got to risk this, I might lose my friends. He goes on, concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitively commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no man or woman could have dreamed would have come his or her way. Whatever you do, he says, or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. Like Akira Sensei, who preceded me, he took one step. He said, do it. Let it be a do. You don't have to have all the answers before you begin. You don't have to have everything in place before you start. You will be shown, because your spirit already knows it. You have to learn to trust in that. And so in spite of 9/11, in spite of the world conflicts, in spite of all sorts of confusion and fear in the world, to be on the path of transcendence might go something like this. People are going to be unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Love them anyway. And if you do good, people will often accuse you of having selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. And if you're successful, you will make and have false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. And the good you do today will often be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. And if those of you who want to walk with honesty and frankness in your life, that'll make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. And people sometimes favor the underdogs, but follow only the top dogs. Fight for some underdogs. And what you spend years building may be destroyed in a short time. May be lost. Help people anyway. And if you give the world the best you've got, you might get kicked in the pants for it. Give the world the best you've got. For you are becoming someone the world has seldom seen. You are becoming dangerous. Be that person anyway. Be transparent to transcendence. Thank you.